This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. With me this week are two splendid people who I enjoy talking to about comic books and all sorts of things. Brian Murray.
Hi.
And Nick White.
Hey.
Thank you both for joining me this week. Super excited that you're both here. This is our, I think, third ever Q&A episode, and as of today, when you're listening to this episode, you can also check out the second issue of the I Read Comic Book Zine, featuring some really cool art and some fantastic articles from people such as Paul, such as Brian, and who else wrote in this book? All sorts of people wrote in this thing. Kara, myself.
Zander.
Even Zander wrote something. That's like the coolest thing. Zander went really deep into Miss Marvel. He had a whole backlog, and he wrote an entire article about his experience in reading something around 2 years of Miss Marvel. So if you get a chance, go to IRCBpodcast.com/zine, and that'll automatically redirect you to the PDF for this upcoming, or for the zine that's out today. And if you want to buy a physical copy, you can go to store.ircbpodcast.com, and you can buy a copy for $5, and I'll mail it to you and write something fun inside of it, and maybe send you some extra stickers and things like that. Anything that I kind of just have hanging around my house, I'll put in an envelope and I'll mail it to you. So I don't know if that's a warning or if that's like a threat, but you know, you'll get something along with this zine. So go buy one. It's really, really good. Like, I'm really proud of what we did with this issue. But we're here to talk about comic books today, outside of my ramblings. So how have you guys been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Brian.
I've been good. Comics have been good. I haven't done a whole lot of reading in the past few weeks. Well, that's not true, actually. I haven't read any of my new single issues, but I recently got a Kindle Fire, so reading comics is actually, like, doable for digital now.
Mm-hmm.
So I promptly read all of DC's Injustice Gods Among Us.
Oh, okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot.
There's a lot of that.
Did you read all the issues, or just like the first season, or however they do that?
I read all 5 years of it.
Oh my god. That's so much.
It was a lot. It kind of goes fast, though. It's not like... It's the kind of book that you can read without paying too much attention to.
Gotcha.
But I also managed to read Infinity Wars #1, which you might remember was my pick from the last time I was on the show. So far, cautiously optimistic. They're not wasting time getting into it. Like, they're kicking off the conflict in issue 1 instead of having, like, you know, the typical event thing of like 2 or 3 issues of like it's building, what's going to happen. They're just like leaping directly into it.
That's exciting.
Yeah, to the point where there's a new character, Requiem. In this event has this new character, Requiem, who was kind of a mysterious character in the Infinity Wars 0 or Infinity Wars Prime or whatever the hell that intro prequel issue was.
Mm-hmm.
But they reveal that character's identity at the end of issue 1, which is cool because you'd kind of expect that, like, you know, they'd clash with Requiem for 5 or 6 issues, and then in issue 7 they'd finally reveal who it is, and then in issue 8 they'd wrap up the event.
Right.
But they're not doing that. They're just kind of getting right to the meat in this event. And the story of Loki and the Librarian at the edge of the universe has continued as well.
Mm-hmm.
They recently found another Loki from another multiverse who has all of the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir.
Oh.
And so there's going to be books about that universe cutting in. Like, so there's going to be Iron Hammer is going to be one of them. It's basically like Iron Man but Thor.
Okay.
Soldier Supreme is going to be Captain America, Doctor Strange. So they're kind of like these characters that are combinations of
Didn't Marvel have like some quirky shorthand name for all these books, like Smash Ups or something? I know they had some funny name for all of these, but
yeah, I feel like I saw something like this on Twitter about something like this. Is that what this
Marvel,
is, Brian?
So I mean, I only half paid attention.
I think they're referring to these as quote unquote Infinity Warps.
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds right.
But some of these I'm really interested to see, like Arachnite I don't know what that is. It's obviously Spider-Man and somebody.
Spider-Man and Moon Knight.
Oh, okay. That sounds awesome. So yeah, I mean, they're doing a lot of cool multiverse stuff, which I've historically always been a sucker for.
Right. That's kind of funny because I feel like the other big event that they had, Secret Wars, was like the end of all the multiverses. And here we are, like, I see this, you see this in the X-Men books, if you're reading all of them, like, they constantly are talking about other dimensions and universes, and I'm like, didn't we just erase all this stuff? Isn't that what the point of that was, to get rid of everything? But
I wish I could quit you.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, it's working. Like, if, Brian, I'm pretty sure you're not the only person really interested in this stuff. So that's really cool to hear. Nick, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been and all that stuff?
Well, I like Brian also. Haven't been reading a whole lot recently, but that's because a lot of my free time has been spent fine-tuning cover letters and redoing my resume. And for those people who live outside the United States, you probably call that a CV. And for those people who live outside the United States, you're also saying, I know what a fucking resume is, Nick. Jesus. You don't need to translate it.
Yeah.
Because my work, in an effort to, I guess, stay afloat in the digital age of news, outsourced, downsized, and laid off my department. So if you have an opening at your work for someone who wants to talk about comics, and I mean, I don't know what the other requirements will be, but you can just sort of slide those in, and I mean, maybe I'll meet them, maybe I won't, but send those to Mike, and we'll look through them. So
yeah, always. Exactly. I mean, yeah.
But beyond that, I did do some reading. I read James Bond Black Box, which is the fourth arc of the Dynamite run after Warren Ellis's 2 arcs and then Andy Diggle's 1 arc, Hammerhead. Mm-hmm. And this is Ben Percy, who is perhaps best known right now for he did Green Arrow coming out of Rebirth, and he also did Teen Titans from Rebirth onwards. And he is now on Nightwing now that he finished his Green Arrow run. And I really enjoyed that Green Arrow run, so that's part of the reason I picked this up. And then you have Rafa Labosco on art. If you probably haven't heard of him, that's because he's largely known for doing indie work in the Irish comic scene, apparently. Okay. And this is his first big league debut, I guess you could say. And he followed that up with Hack Slash versus Vampirella for Dynamite the same year. And Percy's run is definitely more different than Warren Ellis's and even Diggle's. It's much more kinetic. It's much more very on-the-run set pieces, action set pieces. Definitely not as heady or well-researched into, I guess, current geopolitical issues as, say, Warren Ellis's run was.
Yeah.
This is, and that makes it much more easier to follow. It also is much easier to read issue to issue because Percy tends to like to retread what the whole core argument is of the whole plot. So if you're reading it in trade or reading issues back to back, you will find that slightly annoying. But the premise is very, very simple. There's a massive online security breach. It targets government and military officials of the UK. And so they sort of hone in on where this is supposed to be coming from, and it's this tech magnate in Japan who has Yakuza ties. And of course they send in James Bond to recover this black box, but surprise, surprise, of course it's not just British military officials and secrets that are being held, it's the entire world. And so you have all of these world agents converging on the same place at once, with the idea that not only are they going to keep their own secrets hidden, but they're actually going to try to acquire the secrets of the rest of the world. So it kind of turns into a bit of a moral conundrum and issues about digital footprints and whatnot, because Bond has directives to actually recover everybody else's dirt on top of keeping Great Britain's secret. So like I said, it's not that complicated, but Percy does a good job of sort of dropping us into a whole bunch of traditional Japanese settings. We go to a sumo match where we have a fight on a bullet train. We even end up in the Fukushima reactor as well as the suicide forest. So it's you're getting all sorts of views of Japan here. And it's fun. It's sometimes goofy, but ultimately it's a much more accessible Bond that also manages to sidestep a lot of the problematic tropes that turn Bond into something of an icky individual on occasion, I guess is how you could put it.
Gotta say, it does sound like somebody Googled places in Japan. And,
right?
Tried to include as many of them as possible.
Exactly,
really,
exactly.
That's like totally Bond, though. Like that's very much like, all right, let's go to all of these like things. When you think of Japan, let's go to these things that kind of represent modern Japan, or at least whatever the time is, in some fashion. From like an outsider's perspective, they're going to know what these things are without having to go too deep into explaining them to people. To say, oh, you don't have to get the whole history of Japan. Instead, they're just like, oh yeah, sumo, a bullet train, that's synonymous with Japan. Going to a sumo match, that's synonymous with Japan. Maybe the others, I don't know. They're kind of touchy, but even still, I think that totally works for a Bond story.
Yeah. No, they have a really creepy game of cat and mouse that takes place in the suicide forest. So it's a scary place for a sort of scary scenario. So it works. So there's that. Labasco's work reminds me a lot of Leandro Fernandez on The Old Guard or Eduardo Risso on Batman Noir, because it's really, really, really heavy inks against which unusually bright colors pop. So I'd say it's even more Leandro Fernandez in that regard. I guess it makes sense that I heard that some of his professional work before this was inking, because I honestly think he's actually a better inker than he is a penciler, which is kind of weird, but I think it's true. And I mean, other than that, like it's a traditional Bond villain. I mean, when your Bond villain runs his operation out of a hidden Yakuza casino, and he has a giant, huge aquarium that obviously has sharks, of course, right?
Cool,
of course, sharks. And he loses his eyesight, so he gets like a sort of Cyclops-looking visor that hooks him into augmented reality.
Cool. This is all very on brand.
Yeah,
right. It is, and it's so different from like I said, from even Ellis and Diggle. So it's interesting to see the freedom that Dynamite is affording Percy. Even though what is interesting is like the characters like Moneypenny and 007's boss, who I can't remember what his official. I think it's just M, right?
Yeah.
Like they're all following the aesthetic guidelines of Ellis's original run. So I read that, and then the other thing I want to just briefly cover is I did read Alien Dust to Dust #2. We have Gabriel Hardman writing and penciling, Rain Barreto on colors. It's the second issue of an Aliens mini, so that you know what that means. It's time for the alien to disappear for a little bit. Let the humans prove that they can pretty much ruin themselves on their own. Thank you very much. We don't need extraterrestrials. We can do just fine. And we got this. And Hardman sort of demonstrates in a way that his comics sort of are best when they're doused in darkness and shadow, and not really like Gabriel Hardman drawing 2:00 in the afternoon on a sunny day. It's just weird.
Totally.
It's weird, and it's unsettling in its own way that I don't think was intended. Beyond that, Hardman actually plays a little bit with some canon here. We get some canon elements of Alien to the Third Power, if you want to call it that. Nick, it's Alien 3. No, it's not. Look it up. It's Alien to the Third Power. They made that stupid design choice. I'm going to make them live with it, okay?
They'll constantly be cursed by the superscript for the rest of their lives.
Look, you got to fucking own that superscript, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's what I read. What about you, Mike?
Well, I read a bunch. I've been trying to catch up on some digital floppies that I've been ignoring. So I read a bunch of those in the backlog as well as some manga. But the things I want to talk about, I read The Wildstorm, Michael Cray, #10. This is by Brian Hill and Stephen Harris, and I didn't list anybody else because that's all that DC has listed on their website. I think Dexter Vines is on art or on inks because Dexter Vines is probably one of the best inkers in the business as far as I care. This book is so fucking cool. I just want to say this. If you're not reading The Wildstorm or you're not reading The Wildstorm, Michael Cray, and you're trying to make a decision on what you should read, I'm going to tell you to go read both. But if you have to make a choice about only one, I would say read The Wildstorm, Michael Cray, and just kind of roll with the premise to say Michael Cray has been told that he needs to go kill all of these superhumans that exist in the world, such as Green Arrow, such as The Flash, such as John Constantine, such as Wonder Woman. He's out hunting these characters. Because this has to somehow tie back to the DC universe. And so with Warren Ellis's baseline story, Brian Hill has been telling this really cool story about Michael Cray hunting down all of these superheroes. And I know I've talked about it on the show before, but I honestly, with issue number 10, was just another proof, or just further proof, that this book is really, really good. I think it's better than the Wildstorm. And I love Warren Ellis to death, but I honestly believe that I honestly believe that the Wildstorm Michael Cray is the best Wildstorm book that's happening right now. I think there's one more coming pretty soon. I don't know what the schedule is, but Brian Hill's writing is so fucking good. He gets so many just feelings right about the inability to control oneself when you have a higher power that's basically managing you and telling you have a job to do, but you know that you need to fulfill a personal need. There's this huge struggle in Michael Cray's life right now, and I don't want to go into it because it spoils too much of the book, but honestly, I don't know how this book is going to end. I don't know how it's going to top itself given what happened in issue 10, but this is seriously such a cool, action-packed fuck you superhero story that I cannot find another book that's like it, that is as good, that is like this, because there's a lot of those fuck you superhero books out there, but this one is just super good. I really, really love it. Nick, you've been reading some of the Wildstorm stuff. Have you read much of the Michael Cray book?
I haven't read any of it yet.
Okay.
I plan to at some point, but all I know is Jordan and I came across a cover of that a few weeks ago, and we couldn't tell if it was Big Barda or Wonder Woman, because the armor looked like Big Barda's, but she had the lasso, so we were very confused. Maybe.
Yeah, it is Wonder Woman. It is Diana Pierce. That's the character that's in the story, but she's definitely Wonder Woman because she's got the fucking sword and shield in the coolest way. Something happens in issue 10, and it's so cool. I can't get over how cool this book is. Anyways, I've also been reading, so I think I maybe have talked about it on the Goodreads group. I don't know if I've talked about it on the show, but I have been reading Transformers More Than Meets the Eye. And if you don't know what Transformers More Than Meets the Eye is, it is pretty much Lost in Space, but with robots. And it's Transformers, so you're like, oh, but Mike, they're just going to hang out and, do dumb Transformers things. And that's what I thought this book was going to be. Because there's some people that I work with that really recommended it, and I was like, okay, I'll try the first volume. And now I'm 5 volumes deep. And the next volume in the series is a 2-volume arc of a combined series between Robots in Disguise and More Than Meets the Eye, the 2 Transformers books that are going on. And they do this crossover event called Dark Cybertron. And so I read volume 2 of that. And really, the thing that drew me to More Than Meets the Eye is it's kind of like a dumb, sitcom in space where there's kind of bad guys every arc, but on the whole, it's just all these robots that you get to know, and you find out some of their relationships and lots of flashbacks to the past of 2 or 3 million years ago, because these robots have been living for forever, and finding out their interpersonal relationships and seeing them grow and develop and having bad things happen and good things happen. It's been really, really rewarding, and they're just robot people, and they never, ever, ever transform into their quote-unquote alt modes. They never turn into cars or flying spaceships or, in the case of one character, a memory card. They never do that in the series, which is really funny because it's a fucking Transformers book. But yeah, so I'm super into this, and this volume was really good. Dark Cybertron, is the end of this 2-arc crossover event that turned Orion Pax, aka Optimus Prime, back into Optimus Prime because he took a leave of absence because, I don't know, he's Jesus or something and he hates himself. And there's a character in the series called Rodimus, aka Hot Rod. It's a character, I guess, from old Transformers stories. He's a dummy and continues to be a dummy, and he's also the leader of this group of Transformers who exist in the More Than Meets the Eye series. They're on this ship called the Lost Light. If you look at your comic book shop, you're going to see a book called Lost Light coming out. That is the sequel series to this More Than Meets the Eye thing. And the big twist at the end of this whole Dark Cybertron thing is that Megatron, who apparently was dead, gets brought back to life, and he is now a good guy, and he wants to fight on the side of the Autobots. instead of the Decepticons. And so that's a whole big thing that's not going to affect More Than Meets the Eye because they are essentially leaving Cybertron after this story ended, but it will affect the other book, Robots in Disguise, if you care about like Bumblebee and I don't know, the other one, Starscream, I think. I don't know. I don't care about any of them. I care about all these other weird robots. So this book is really good. I don't know how to properly describe it. It is a lot about just gay robots. That's how people have described it to me. Because all of the robots are like him characters, but some of them are kind of in love with each other, and that's like a big draw for a lot of the folks that have pitched this book to me. So I'm really enjoying it, and I was really glad to get through this volume because the first volume of Dark Cybertron like definitely took a long time to get through, and it was hard to read. The second volume I read in one sitting. I don't know where the writing changed, but yeah, a lot of people on this book. James Roberts, John Barber, the two authors, and then the thing that's interesting is they had Attilio Rojo, James Reyes, Livio Romandelli, Andrew Griffith, Phil Jimenez, and Brandon Cahill, all on artists' work for this book. Because as the story's being told, they change artists based on the different storylines going on, which is really awesome to keep track of like who's actually talking because they're fucking robots and you don't have like the ability to figure out where their face is. So when they change art styles, you kind of go, okay, now they're talking about Rodimus and Orion Pax in this other place, and oh no, we're back to Bumblebee and Starscream arguing, and oh no, this is actually the giant titans fighting these miniature micro robots. And so the art changes between all of those and makes it a little bit easier to track. Yeah, guys, I'm into Transformers now. So
yeah, so basically, it's personal growth and character development, and there's no actual transforming.
There's some No, there's no transforming.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, no, I'm just let me know when the follow up to More Than Meets the Eye, Transformers. What you see is what you get shows up, because that's Transformers WYSIWYG is when I will actually be interested. That's
I'll let you know. I'll let you know,
please.
Well, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about what books we're excited for this upcoming week. Comic books are being released on August 15, 2018. What are you excited for this week? Let's start with you, Nick.
For me, it's going to be Gideon Falls number 6. I don't want to say too much about the series because obviously it is a series that is very contingent upon twists and turns and shocking revelations, but I will say that I just recently read 4 and 5. And if you were someone who was kind of fleetingly interested in this book because you thought it had Twin Peaks vibes, if you're already reading it, you're going to love it more. If you haven't started, you need to, because the Twin Peaks similarities are only getting stronger. On the other side of things, if you're someone who doesn't really like being scared, this is probably your last chance to hop off before this train leaves the station, because boy oh boy, it continues to get real scary. 6 will be the end of the first arc, and I don't want to take a chance that everybody isn't caught up, so I won't say much about 4 and 5, but beyond what I have. But I will say this, Andrea Sorrentino, the artist, has really shown with this book that, one, his panel work is even more expansive and expressive and unconventional than I thought it was. And some of that is probably, obviously, Jeff Lemire / some collaboration between Lemire and Sorrentino. But the undeniable truth is that Sorrentino has the ability to execute this, and I think that's really something worth celebrating. His panel work in this book is so all over the place. And beyond that, his artwork and his art style in this book is actually, I find it to be a pretty big departure, even in some ways, from his Green Arrow run and even his Old Man Logan run. And some of that might be having Dave Stewart on colors instead of like Marcelo Maiolo, who normally colors his stuff for DC. But I mean, in issue 5, there was a hypnosis segment or little plot going on, and I thought they hired a completely different artist, and I had to go back to the front of the book to go look up the credits and see who Jeff Lemire had, strong-armed into working on this book, and lo and behold, it was still Andrea Sorrentino. I couldn't believe it. So my hat is always off to that guy. So talented, so talented. Can't wait to see the end of this arc. Can't wait for those people who are trade weighting this book or looking for a slightly more affordable package to get these titles in. I can't wait for those people to pick it up, and enjoy it too. So, that's
cool.
what I'm pumped for.
Brian, what about you?
For this week, I'm looking forward to Crowded #1. That's a new outing from friend of the show, Christopher Sabella and Rose Stein.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is like the second Sabella book in as many months that I've chosen, but...
That's okay.
Guy's good. Guy can write. And it's actually only because it's Sabella writing that I'm willing to try this out. Crowded takes place in a world where, like, the gig economy, so, the Uber and all that kind of stuff. It's all taken over every part of life. And so this book involves an assassination, crowdsourcing, or crowd run
Oh, God.
venture called
Damn
Reaper.
it, I told you not to kill him between peak hours. We can't afford this.
The company is called Reaper. That's with a Reaper with no E at the end. So just Reap R.
So it's edgy. Good, yeah.
Yes. Well, you know how all these things drop.
Remove
drop
all the
E.
vowels. That's how you name a company. Yeah.
Hey, I mean, Twitter didn't have any vowels in it when they first came up with the idea, and they're like, well, people probably don't know what the fuck that logo means, so we should probably add some letters.
And stop calling it twatter. Anyways, this story revolves around a character who wakes up one morning to find out that a $1 million bounty, essentially, has been placed on her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she hires a bodyguard from a different app called Defender. That is, again, Defender with no E.
Of course, it has to be, yeah.
I love it.
This premise is goofy as all hell, and I would assume it would be very stupid. But I know that Sabella is a great writer, and the art looks really interesting. It's I'd call it, it's charming. It's got this vaguely cartoonish look to it. It's I'm struggling for how to describe it because I'm not good at describing art.
I mean, I think cartoony is a good example, or a good, descriptor of it. Like, everything is kind of exaggerated for these characters, and I don't think that's bad, but it does look cartoony.
Certainly
in a way.
Not. No. I already like the art, but it's going to be a trip. It could be bad. Like I said, I would assume it was going to be if it didn't have the pedigree that it has, but definitely going to give it a shot come Wednesday. Or, 3 weeks from Wednesday when I finally pick up my comic books.
Right.
That's on me. What about you, Mike?
For me this week, I'm excited about The Weatherman #3. This is Jody Lee Hupp and Nathan Fox. This book continues to be so fast-paced, it's almost hard to stop reading it. It's like you almost have to go back and read it again because so much happens in such a quick succession in this series. It's very, very good. For those of you who don't know what The Weatherman is, the story for #1 is it opens on a character who is the weatherman for Mars, and he's talking. He basically is this kind of shithead dude who does the weather on a news station. Some huge tragedy happened that killed everyone on Earth. And we reveal in issue #1, spoilers, that it was the Weatherman, but he has no recollection of doing this. In fact, he has no recollection of anything before 6 or 7 years ago. So, or maybe it's shorter than that, maybe a few years ago. Nonetheless, the story is this very fast-paced, whodunit kind of. There's a lot of pieces that are factoring into it about. Did the Weatherman do this? Was he brainwashed? Did he work for a military institution? Meanwhile, other military institutions and all these other things are trying to capture him and capture other people. There's a lot of players in the game, and a lot of things happen. And really, I strapped myself in after issue 1 because the reveal of not just what I said, but everything else that's going on around the story is so cool that I was like, I don't know if I can get out of this chair. I really need to see how this keeps going. And it's like Nathan Fox's art in this book is so insane, and it's kinetic and very high action, and it feels like every panel has a lot of energy in it, and I'm loving it. And it's like not even just the interiors, but the covers by themselves are enough for me to like sit and stare and feel like I'm gone on some sort of mushroom or acid trip. Like they're these bright, vibrant colors. I highly suggest you go look up the cover to Weatherman #1 or Weatherman #2 or 3. They're just these bright neon color things that just hit you and like send a wave of something over your mind that you're not sure what happened. It's really, really good. Go ahead, Brian.
Just as a warning, there is a graphic depiction of a dog's head blowing up at the end of the first issue. So
Yes.
Be on guard for that. It caught me by surprise. It really turned my stomach. So
same here.
I don't know.
Yeah, and
I don't want people to be surprised by that.
Yeah. Okay, that's probably something. Yeah. But nonetheless, I'm really enjoying this book, at least in the first 2 issues, so I'm excited to see where number 3 goes. If anything, I'll see it through the arc, regardless of how I feel about the next few issues, because I'm really digging the amount of world building that they're doing as well. Like it seems like Jody Leop and Nathan Fox are putting a lot of time and effort into this series, not just creating it, but trying to build more around it. Like they have Spotify playlists and all this extra fun stuff in the back of each of the issues. So yeah, if you haven't checked this out, I highly recommend it. I think it's a pretty cool book. Our show this week is a Q&A episode. Q&A episode number 3. And just another reminder, we do have a zine that came out today as well. It is the second zine for I Read Comic Books. If you haven't read the first one, go check it out at ircbpodcast.com/zines, plural. But if you want to get this quarter's issue of I Read Comic Books zine, go to ircbpodcast.com/zine, singular, and you'll get an actual copy of this, a digital copy of this with some really cool stuff in it, questions and fun little chibi stats and all sorts of fun things. But we have a handful of questions to get through today. We're super excited that we got a bunch of questions. We have gotten a few questions in every single one. As always, you can send any question that you like. Doesn't have to be comic book related, to the IRCB podcast using the hashtag IRCBQA, or you can email them directly to ircb@destroythecybe.org. So let's just dive into one of the big ones that we've got here. This is from Simon, Dom with a little D on Twitter. He asks us, do you think the age of the superstar writer-artist has come to an end, or do you think that we are on the cusp of comic creators penetrating into the public consciousness? That word looked weird when I read it. Nick, Brian, what do you guys think about this question? It's kind of a big question to unpack, so let's dive into it.
I guess, first off, great question. Really great question. I think on some levels, for me, it sort of transforms into another question, which is sort of one that we've tackled before, and I don't know if we've ever had a satisfactory answer before, but that really is, with all of this money and success that Marvel and I guess DC to some extent has had with these movies and this sort of worldwide recognition and understanding of what makes up a lot of these universes, has that translated into people picking up comics, which in turn sort of leads into your question of have these people, having seen these films and whatnot, actually bothered to go pick up the books and therefore learn who some of these authors and artists are? And we've sort of struggled with that before. I think my offhand answer was I don't think so. But, when I look at the sales of comic books, it certainly doesn't feel like people are really jumping on board, but then that just falls into the whole issue of, well, maybe new readers are reading digital, and if they're reading digital, then we don't have the numbers on that. And so, anyway, great complicated question, and I've already fallen down the rabbit hole on it, so I guess that only further justifies how good it is.
Yeah. I think the idea of the superstar writer/artist is in a lot of ways done. Like, I don't think that a creator nowadays is going to get the kind of fame and status that your Stan Lee or your Jack Kirby got back in the day. That does not mean that the art being created now is not as good or better as what they were putting out. But I think that in the age of the internet, it is a lot more possible for people to become, I guess you could call it small-scale famous, as opposed to, what Simon phrased as a superstar. So I think that we're going to see a lot more comic creators becoming famous in the realm of people who read comics. But I do think that the age of a writer or an artist for a comic book being a household name, I think that's over.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm trying to figure out where the line is between like what is considered like a superstar and what's considered successful. And, I think that there are a lot of comic creators that are like very successful, but are they superstars to the level of Rob Liefeld being in a Levi's commercial? I don't think so.
Right.
I do think on the flip side that we are seeing a push for the mainstream world, and I don't mean to like say that there's this big fucking line between mainstream world and comics, because it isn't, because it's all blended together to a certain extent. But one thing that I've noticed when I talk to folks and they find out that I read comic books, because I always find a way to bring it up no matter what conversation I'm having with somebody, I always find a way to say, oh yeah, well I work for a comic book website and I also read a shitload of comic books, and I also have a podcast.
And have you heard my podcast? Please leave.
And also, please don't leave, please.
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah. And I mean, and I always, play it down. It's like, oh no, I have this thing. It's just something that I do. Because we all like to shit on ourselves about that kind of stuff. But what the point I'm actually trying to get to is that when folks find out that I do read comic books, they do tell me, oh, well, I read a comic book one time, or I did go read this thing. Have you heard of this Batman book that was done by Scott Snyder? And to them,
have you heard of this Batman?
No. But like, hear me out. I think
I know what you're saying. I just couldn't resist the
perspective.
Joke.
Yeah, is really interesting, because I think that 95% of the time when someone says that to you, it's because they're assuming that they're talking to somebody that's not really into comics or has ever even read a comic book. So they could say, oh man, this Batman book is really good. You probably haven't heard about it. To the three of us, Scott Snyder's Batman is like fucking whatever, man. That's AAA title bullshit. But, from the perspective of someone that doesn't read comic books, they just found out about this thing, and so they're really excited to talk to you about it. I think that it's slowly breaking in, but I don't think Scott Snyder as a person is going to become a superstar. I think that, it helps that when, creators like Scott Snyder or Tom King or who's Grant Morrison end up on, the late night show with Seth Meyers, because I think that's great, like, publicity for comics in general. That's them proving that not only are superhero books viable for your everyday reader, like Tom King showed up on Seth Meyers and he talked about Sheriff of Babylon, and he also talked about Mr. Miracle. And what I think is really interesting is that maybe somebody who has a buddy that was in Iraq might be interested in Sheriff of Babylon now. They probably would have never, ever heard of it or never seen it. Maybe they saw it at Barnes & Noble one time. They're like, oh, that looks cool, and you walk by. But then you actually hear about what that book is. You go, maybe I'll try a comic book. And I think that at the end of the day, we don't necessarily, like, we as folks that are really involved in comics, the goal isn't to convert somebody over into, becoming a huge comic book reader like we are that has a pull list. That's never going to happen. I think what's important is to say, like, do people recognize comic books enough to say, you know what, I'm going to read a novel this week, or instead I'm going to read this comic book this week, to see them at like a parallel line, and whether that's a Batman book or if it's, Box Brown's Life of Andre, like, it doesn't matter what they're reading so long as they're reading comic books and they see them as a medium that is equal to that of prose or of television or of movies. And I realize I've gotten way far off of the actual question. But I think what I'm getting at is it's not so much about it. Unfortunately, it's not so much about the creators who deserve the recognition, but I think the first step is to just making sure that people see comic books as a medium that is worth reading and spending time on. Because I think if you told your average everyday person that, hey, I spend $20 a week or, $100 a month or whatever it is on comic books, they'd go, fucking comic books? We're still in that era of people not seeing them as like a valuable medium in general, even if you're talking about graphic novels or something like that. So I hope that kind of gets to the point. I realize I haven't given you guys a chance to talk because I don't shut the fuck up. So please respond.
Please clap.
Yeah.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, like, comic book people entering into some level of like superstardom or into some sort of level of public visibility, I think in a lot of ways is difficult in general for just authors on the whole. I mean, we can talk about George R.R. Martin, we can talk about J.K. Rowling, or Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, but those are exceptions to the rule, right? I mean, we don't find authors on talk shows all the time. They're not really entering into that, sphere of, I guess, pop culture that is highly publicly visible. So I think comic book people are no different in that regard. That being said, and I think this is probably a pretty good example, like Mark Miller, like if anyone deserved to be right in the spotlight right now, it would be Mark Miller, especially after he got that deal, and he's now with Amazon, and he's got the Magic Order going on and all of that. Like if there was anybody who would have reached that point by now, I feel like it would be him. And
he feels like the fucking Stan Lee of our generation in a lot of weird ways, and I think that's what he's going for. But I mean, I don't mean to interrupt too much. I just think that's really fine. Funny that you say that.
I think if anyone would have been able to reach that point, and let's be clear, even though I think anyone who listens to the show knows this very well, this is not me singing the praises of his work from the rooftops. I'm merely saying he knows how to get stuff sold to companies, to sell the rights to things. He knows how to get things optioned, and more importantly, he knows how to turn money around off of them.
Right.
So if anyone would have acquired this by now, I think it would be him, and I don't really think he has. So
I think he's tried a lot. I think that there's a handful of people that we could probably talk to.
He's closer than anyone else.
I mean, it's him and Robert Kirkman at this point, I think.
Oh, that's a good one. You know what? I would argue he's actually been more visible because he's shown up on those shows a lot too.
Yeah. Well, and
Talking Dead and all of that.
It helps that The Walking Dead is so fucking massively successful.
Right.
I mean, good on Robert Kirkman. We may say what you will about The Walking Dead, like the guy took a comic book idea and made it work really, really well, and we have to give him credit for that. Like, he turned it around. I don't think he's been a dick about it, as far as I know. I think he's been very humbled about how successful his stuff is. It doesn't help him from making a fuckload of money off of merchandising and Telltale games and action figures and stuff. You can't go to a convention without finding Walking Dead merchandise. So I think he might be the closest to superstardom. But I think Simon's question of, do we think that this age is coming to an end? I think Brian actually answered that question before by saying we probably won't see any superstars, but we'll see a lot of people that are semi-popular among niche groups, right? Like fantasy writers or, young adult writers or superhero writers and stuff. Like Brian Michael Bendis, I think, is very successful, and he's synonymous with superhero comics, and that's probably as much as he wants. I don't think Brian Michael Bendis wants to be on the red carpet and on interview shows and all that stuff. I think he just wants to write really cool comics, and he has reached that level that I would consider superstardom within the niche market or niche market. Someone was telling me about that niche market. I need to say that correctly.
Both pronunciations are acceptable.
Thank you.
Yeah, tell that guy to fuck off.
Yeah, that was Kelly. So Nick, I'm not going to do that.
Oh, well, in that case, tell Kelly to no.
In that case, tell Kelly I said hi.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this is I think there's still a lot to unpack here. We did an episode about this, I think, and there's still more to be said about it. And I think it's still changing as comic books grow more and more. And despite the decline that we probably saw this year, I think we saw in print, it was like 2 or 3%. I guarantee, I'm not certain. I can't speak to it. I don't know. I'm just saying I feel like digital is growing. And is making up that print loss. But nonetheless, comic books are growing in general because people that are buying digital are still definitely buying print. I'm one of those people that's still buying tons of graphic novels and stuff, and I'm also buying digital. So I think as the market grows, we'll see how it evolves, but I don't know. We'll have to come back to this year after year.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly insert this here. I don't know if Simon was sort of getting at, are we out of that era where Grant Morrison and Jim Lee are these huge lauded individuals within the industry and no one else comes close and they're the best at their job and no one is even comparable or whatever. I feel like we're past that. I feel like there isn't someone who like rolls into the room and they're like, you know, blah blah blah, look at me, I'm the best at what I do and whatnot. I feel like that sort of ego is gone now, just because there are so many different artists doing so many different things now. It's like, you know, Jim Lee style doesn't have that. Again, speaking for myself, Jim Lee style doesn't have that sort of hook or appeal that I think it used to.
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
some
don't
Jim
think
Lee
there's
people are going to be mad.
Well, I don't think that there is a singular person or handful of people like that anymore. Like, we can call out Scott Snyder, we can call out Tom King, we can call out, you know, Kieran Gillen, you know, Warren Ellis, folks like that. But I don't think any of them want to be in the spotlight. I think they just want to make their shit. The end. Right. You know?
Yeah. Yeah,
so
totally.
Final thoughts on that, Brian? I realize we've been just yelling.
No. If I had anything that I thought would contribute, I would have jumped in with it.
Okay. So we got another question here.
For, Brian.
Yeah, we've got a couple other questions here. So this is kind of a meta question I want to go into that I'm really excited to hear the answers for it. I wish I could ask everyone on the show. What do you like the most about podcasting?
Oh boy.
I'm not going to talk. I want to hear what you guys think. I will eventually talk. Let's be honest here.
The illusion that someone is paying attention? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's the illusion. I think it's the fact that someone has to.
Yeah.
Or someone is considering the idea that they might listen to me. Sure, that's fair.
Yeah, I went out with like the flippant joke answer first, but my real answer is I love the idea that somebody is interested in what I have to say. You know, every time that I get a new follower on Twitter, I always see that like they're also following IRCB podcast. So I'm like, oh, cool. So this person like heard what I said and it resonated enough with them that they're like, cool, I want to see what else he has to say. And so I love that idea of being able to kind of reach out into the world and metaphorically touch someone.
Metaphorically,
yeah. What about you, Nick?
I mean, I think on some level I just find it so funny that, like, you know, you and I had these sorts of discussions for so long there, and then we were like, you know what, let's just see if someone else wants to actually hear this discussion. And it's just been interesting to find that there's an audience for that. And like Brian said, I just love getting feedback and hearing what people think about things, or hearing what episodes really clicked with people, or finding out that someone really enjoyed a book that I liked, or finding people that seem to share similar tastes in reading, and so you can recommend things back and forth. And there's just something really, I guess, enriching about that, especially for me. So
the feedback is definitely great. Anytime that I get any like a mention on Twitter, or if somebody like sends an email talking about like, oh, I really enjoyed the show this week, that is like a warm feeling inside that lasts all day.
Yeah, totally. I've loved podcasting since podcasting was kind of a thing. It's something that I've been trying to do on and off for a really long time. And honestly, I've said this a million times on the show, on like the annuals and stuff. This is the longest running thing I think I've ever done. Right? Like consistently. Like you have projects or you have things that you have in your life that I've had that for a long time. Or I own this thing, or I've done this thing, like played soccer or whatever your interests are. Outside of actually physically buying comic books, like this is the longest creative thing that I've done. And it feels weird to call it a creative thing, but there's like a lot of planning and time and effort that you have to put into it, not just for me, but I know for you guys as well. Like everyone that's on the show puts in so much work. I feel like I ask the world of everybody all the time, which is why I'm always apologizing and all this stuff to everybody. But the fact that we sit down and I'm having conversations with people whose opinions I very, very much enjoy and I love talking to about comics is like the most rewarding thing. Every week we're in the show, I'll walk away and I'll go, damn, that was a good conversation. And I'm really happy to have it, because I feel like, as people that are reading comic books, like we are on the peripherals of the actual comic book industry. I think that what we're doing is I don't want to say it's less important, but it's not the actual comic book creation itself, but people do find a lot of value in it because commentary on these types of things is valuable to others. And so to be involved in that and to get all that feedback from folks is great. But I also, the act of this, like Nick said, was kind of like, we have these conversations all the time. Maybe we should record them, which is kind of like a selfish thing. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's worked out because people are involved. People actually wanted to be on this show. When I asked them, hey, would you be interested in being a host? That's the most nerve-wracking question I can ask anybody. You know, when we were putting together the crew that was more than just me and Nick, and then eventually me and Paul and Nick, and I should say Zander was there from the beginning because he's a fucking godsend human being. You know, like, it's massively... It makes me feel great that there are people that actually want to have conversations about comics every week with us. And I always want, this is why I love having guests on, because it feels super rewarding to know that they were willing to come on the show. Like, that is, it's super rewarding. I think that's the answer. That's what I like the most about podcasting, is like, it's, we're doing something every week, and it feels like it has meaning. It's not just us talking into microphones like idiots. We're putting together something that's actually like valuable. Not like to us, and then it also happens to be valuable to other people. Yeah, that's my big long thought about it. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that before we could move on to another question?
No, I think you summed it up really well. I think on a basic level, like, so much of it for me is that, as you were saying, we come away from these dialogues and discussions and conversations, and we have so much fun, and we come away learning about new books or having a new appreciation for something. And it's just, sometimes I sort of sit there and I wonder, like, you know, I'm sure there are people out there who maybe buy all their books digitally, or they just don't live near a shop or something like that. And I'm sure those people want to interact and engage and pick other people's minds and have these discussions with people. And so, I'm just really glad that, you know, we're putting something out there that people enjoy, and, you know, maybe certain people that are finding themselves in these situations where they really want to interact and engage, but like I said, either they don't live near a shop, or maybe they don't like that shop. You know, it's great that we can put something out there amongst other shows that are obviously, you know, doing, you know, similar things too.
Just think of us as like the online version of those enthusiastic nerds at the comic shop.
Yeah, and we're not going to be shitheads to you about the books that you like.
Yeah, we're not like crappy gatekeepers.
Yeah.
We're not going to come up every 3 minutes and ask if you're doing okay. Which, again, just to say, sometimes people need that, so that's fine. I don't want to knock customer service.
Yeah.
Here at IRCB, if you say no thanks, just browsing, we'll leave you alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I guess, okay, so another question that we got, this is from Robert on Twitter. He actually asked this a long time ago, and I didn't have an answer, so I didn't include it in the show notes for the last Q&A that we had. But he asked the question, hey, IRCB podcast, why don't you have a Patreon page? This isn't some big, huge announcement episode by any means, but this is something that I've been thinking about and talking about among some of the people on the show. Should we do this? Should we not? And we kind of had this big hesitation last year around the Kickstarter, and we did the Kickstarter, and it was massively successful. So successful that I still am like baffled at how well it did, and I'm so appreciative to the people that donated. And it just goes to show that we have some of the best fucking comic book fans out there that want to participate in this show, and I'm so happy we were able to make things happen with people, like the hangouts and everything that we did. But the idea in my head that keeps swirling along this question is, why don't we have a Patreon page? Is that something we want? Is that something that's going to be successful by any means? And the question, and I've asked people out, like we put a survey out. We're going to put out another I Read Comic Book survey this year, and I think the answer is, we're probably going to roll one out in the next couple of months. I think that's the most solid answer I can give without over-promising too much. I've been working on a Patreon page for probably a year, which sounds fucking ridiculous now that I say it out loud, but trying to make sure that the tiers are what we want, studying what other podcasts have been doing and what successful podcasts are doing for their Patreon folks, to give the right amount of rewards for the right amount of, you know, pledged money. It's something that I super want to do. It's just a matter of actually getting around and we want to do another Kickstarter this year for the zine that we've got, for things that are coming down the pipeline. I think we're going to do another Kickstarter, and then after the Kickstarter, I think we're going to move over to Patreon for the future support of the show. That's the long answer. And I mean, Brian and Nick, I know you guys listen to a lot of other podcasts. Are you patrons to other podcasts? Do you have any interest in that? What are your guys' opinions on that? Because I'm always curious what other folks think about this stuff. I'm the guy in charge, but I also would love everybody's opinion all the time because I can only make so many decisions.
Yeah, I've signed up for a couple different Patreons for different podcasts. I like the idea of giving money to support the show without necessarily having to get something, if that makes sense. Like, I mean,
oh sure,
there's usually like the Patreon backer rewards and things like that, but I like being able to just set it up. You
heard it here first. Brian doesn't want any rewards. No rewards for the for the upcoming Kickstarter. Everyone,
I'm not in it for that, baby. I'm in it for the art.
No prizes.
I'm here for the art.
Right.
Yeah, just the idea that I can just like set it up, and then on the 3rd of every month, $5 just goes from my account to the Patreon. I don't have to think about it. Because that's a big part. Like with a lot of Kickstarters, I look at them, and the barrier for entry is usually a little bit higher on a Kickstarter. So a lot of times it's like, I don't have $20 to pitch in right now. But with Patreon, you know, I can plan it in the budget and work around it really easily.
Right.
So it's a very long-winded answer of saying, yes, I have done Patreon for
I mean,
podcasts.
No, I think that justification totally makes sense. And it's funny because I feel like when we put out the I Read Comic Book survey a year or two ago, a lot of people were saying, I don't necessarily have a monthly budget that I can subscribe, but I can do a one-time thing. Right. And I thought that was really interesting because I wholeheartedly believe the opposite. But that being said, given the small Twitter survey that we did, it's, you know, I think we had like 40 or 50 people answer the survey. You know, it looks like the things have reversed. I think Patreon is becoming more and more of a supported platform for that kind of stuff. But Nick, I'll let you answer as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't currently do any Patreons for podcasts. I think part of that is just a lot of the shows I listen to already have like a lot of them are slightly bigger shows, so they have like corporate sponsors already.
Oh, sure.
So they don't have that sort of financial structure underpinning them. But I would at least agree with you that I think that probably the Patreon model is sort of the new one now, especially because people are so used to subscription services really are just the thing right now anyway for everything.
Totally. Yeah.
So that's just what people are used to. And I think in terms of arranging and setting up something like that, I think it's so much easier to have a Patreon structure than a Kickstarter structure, because that, of course, is like, that just seems like monumentally so much more work. Because you always have to arrange it around something, and you have to, you know, set up tiers and as Brian was lamenting, you know, figure out rewards and then figure out what's fair at what level. And I'm sure no one's going to be surprised by this, but if any of you out there haven't tried setting up a Kickstarter, it's a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
It's a ton of work.
Yeah.
So I can totally see why people are more receptive to that and why we're looking at that model now as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, setting up a Kickstarter is, I'm already in the throes of the current Kickstarter planning, and we probably aren't going to launch it until, I want to say, October or so. Don't hold a gun to my head about that. I think it kind of depends on a handful of factors. I need to do some more tallying of costs and things like that, but nonetheless, like, it's a lot of planning. I love Patreon. I love being able to support creators. Like, I support like the Glass Cannon podcast is one of my favorite podcasts. Pathfinder tabletop gaming podcast. It's really, really good. And they're wildly successful with that, and I think that that's like a really good model for podcasts as well as YouTube creators, for folks that are running into issues with monetization on YouTube in general, especially if they're smaller, and you want to help them out, like using a Patreon to say, here's $1 a month from me. That makes me feel really good that I'm able to contribute and help, even if I'm not getting any reward. Like, I think to Brian's point, my thought is, you're creating content that I realize takes a lot of time, and I want to somehow support you in that. Even a $1 support of a podcast or YouTube or just an artist is super helpful, especially when you've got, if you have 100 or 200 people, $200 a month can go a long way, especially if you're creating something that you're giving out for free. I think something like JL8, that Yale Stewart webcomic, or Natasha Alderisi, who does Heathen, she also puts out a bunch of work for free on her Patreon. If you're a subscriber, she just gives you a bunch of stuff. Like, she did a whole dinosaur comic that you got for being like a $1 or $2 subscriber. And you could have gotten that for 1 month. You could have gotten that for 2 years worth of contribution. But she's giving that out for free, and then she gave it out to just everybody for free. But like, if you were a subscriber, it's like, that your dollar went to creating that in a weird, like, roundabout way of doing things. I think that's super great. I love the idea of Patreon. I can't stress that enough, because I just want to help people create their cool shit. Because I'm not creating, art or whatever. Like, we're creating this podcast, and I realize that takes time and effort, but I also want to be able to support folks that are creating other things that I maybe can't create or don't have the ability to create or time to create, and I really enjoy and want to consume, I guess. So, yeah, long-winded answer. We're trying, Robert. I'm working on it, I promise. So let's see, last question here. We've got a couple to pick from. Does Zander actually have any magical powers? That's the question that we'll end this on. Brian and Nick, we've all known Zander for quite a while, not just from this podcast, but before. In your time of knowing Zander, what magical powers have you witnessed from him? Because I know he has a huge array of them.
Probably his ability to simultaneously laugh at what you've said and also silently despise whatever ideas you've presented in front of him.
God, Nick.
I think it would be that.
I think that's specific to you, though, Nick.
That might just be specific to you.
Xander's got a good game face. Like, I'll say that.
Oh, but you paint Zander to be so mean-spirited. He absolutely is not.
No,
Xander is the most wholesome person in the entire
not
world.
mean-spirited. He won't tell you, right then and there that he thinks whatever you're sharing with him is something he's not really a fan of.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
What about you, Brian?
He's a magician in the kitchen. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, this is true.
We went over and hung out at his place a couple weekends ago. He made pasta sauce, made the sauce himself, did all the... he spent like 5 hours in the kitchen. Like, not slaving over a hot stove, necessarily, but he put in all the work to make homemade pasta sauce for us.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
No, I know Zander likes to cook. I always thought that's really cool. Like, the dude loves being in the kitchen, I think. When he's not slaving over editing this show, he's in the kitchen, I think.
Yeah, no, I remember back in high school, like, he'd be like, I can't hang out this weekend. And I'm like, okay, why? Explain yourself. And he'd be like, Chinese New Year, gonna be cooking. And I'd be like, cooking all day? And he'd be like, yep, all day. I'm like, okay, guess I'll just play Mario Tennis by myself.
See, but normal. It's paid off because Zander makes really good food in general. Doesn't matter what it is. The guy makes good food. I mean, the magical powers I've seen Zander, I've witnessed at least, or I've heard legend of, is, Zander can fly. He absolutely can. He has the ability to magically go from place to place. Whether that's, maybe it's flying, maybe it's teleportation, I don't know. He can
charge a cell phone from 20 to 100% in under 2 minutes.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
Using his mind.
Mm-hmm. I know that his one super weakness is, I hate to say it on the show, but I got it, because if we're going to talk about the greatness of Zander, we must talk about his weakness. Sure. I know that it's sugary food. Doesn't matter what it is. Zander's a sucker for a good cake or pie. I don't know which one he prefers the most, but I know that one time I got him a cake, and it almost killed him. I'll just say that. It's not. This isn't like some weird roundabout diabetes thing. One time we bought Zander a birthday cake, and he almost died. I don't know if it was from his weakness to sugary foods or the fact that he was embarrassed, but we got him a birthday cake, and he almost died.
Yeah, it's become a running joke that nobody knows when Xander's birthday is.
And yet we figure it out every year.
Like, at this point, it's on my calendar. I know when his birthday is. But we still, every year, we host a LAN party that just so happens to coincide with Xander's birthday, but is certainly not a birthday party in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
There's a cake, but it's, again, an unrelated cake, one that has nothing to do with Zander.
Purely coincidental, yeah.
So... That's always a good time.
Okay. Yeah, it's always great. I mean, I only wanted to bring this question up because I know that we say it every year, we talk about it all the time, but Zander is the best, and he does such great work for this show, and he really does have superpowers. He makes us sound fantastic, and we love him for it. So that's the last question we'll round the show off with. So Nick and Brian, thank you for being on the show. These Q&A episodes are always so much fun. But yeah, we'll roll through the credits now. You can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans, spelled a weird, fun way, so check out the show notes. You can follow Brian on Twitter at BrianHead. It turns out he's not a ski resort. You can follow me on Twitter at Mike Rapin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast. We post all sorts of things. I try to retweet artists and causes and cool things that you should follow. And we post polls every week on Sundays. This week's poll was, what kind of formal wear do the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles wear? Just an open question with some answers.
Yeah. Beyond that, go ahead, check out our Goodreads group. We have weekly threads and great discussions about comics. Every day that I'm on there, I'm finding someone bringing up a new book that I've never heard about, or someone loving something that I really wasn't sure about. And so you just get, opinions out there, and you can just look into things further. Beyond that, check out our website, IRCBpodcast.com, where we host our episodes. And we also have merch and a pronunciation guide there. So we're growing every day.
Please go ahead and rate and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you prefer. I know we're on Spotify now. That's exciting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you have any other questions, comments, concerns, if you just want to tell us how much you love us, go ahead and email the show, ircb@destroythecybe.org.
Infinity Shred does all the music for our show. They are the best band in the universe, as I say every week, because it's true, and it's confirmed. But if you listen to their music, it's fantastic. Zander, he's an 8th level wizard, 4th level rogue, 12th level character. He's not going to take any of your kingdom's bullshit, because he wants to get paid yesterday. He also edits the show, and he's an amazing person. Thank you all. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Nick, for being on the show. Thanks to the listeners. Thanks to everyone that sent in questions. I hope we answered them to an acceptable level. So until next time, find that friend who's a little down, give them a high five, and remind them that they're a good friend. Thanks for listening.